So our scripture last week ended with the Jews, which is John's shorthand for the religious authorities, indignant at the formerly blind man's attempts to teach them, reviling the man, and casting him out, John writes, presumably of the synagogue. This man had been affiliated with Jesus for, what, a day? And already it was beginning to cost him. It does, after all, cost to be with Jesus. To give your life to Christ, to devote yourself to Him and to His teachings, is not without consequence, though many think that it is. Many think that becoming a Christian essentially means making their good a little bit better. Others consider getting saved as just one step among many in the classic Bible Belt lifestyle. You get dedicated at birth, you get baptized at 10, you get rededicated at 14, you learn how to drive at 16, you earn the right to vote at 18, you get rededicated again at 20, and then by your mid to late 20s embark upon the lifestyle of the middle-class cultural Christian. But it's Jesus who equates discipleship with taking up a cross. It's Jesus who warns that the effect of His kingdom will be to divide a house of 5 into 3 against 2, with father set against son, and son against father, mother against daughter, daughter against mother, daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. Jesus is the one who promises, not warns, that if they persecuted me, they will also persecute you, because a servant is not greater than his or her master. You cannot take Jesus seriously for long before the world that rejected Him sets its hostile sights on you. And this healed man was experiencing that in real time. Consider what he suffered on account of the work of Christ in him. Immediate cultural suspicion, as no sooner had he been healed than he was reported to the Pharisees. And what a humiliating process that was. He was accused of being a liar. He was scorned as a blasphemer, derided for being born in utter sin, and treated as less than by the religious elites. Even his own family had abandoned him, choosing to preserve their status rather than stand with their son. And now at the end of it all, he's been cast out of the synagogue, an expulsion that meant the end of all of his religious and social relationships, and which would have mired him in shame. You can't help but wonder if in this moment the man is wondering, what have I done? What's all this hardship even for? And better yet, who's it all for? This man Jesus, who is He? And in our passage this morning, Jesus shows us who He is. So if you would please turn in your Bibles to the Gospel of John chapter 9, though the text will also be available to your screen. And follow along as I read John 9, verses 35 through 38. John 9, 35 through 38. John writes, Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and having found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered, "And who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and it is he who is speaking to you." He said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshiped him. This is the word of the Lord. So Jesus hears that the man has been cast out. We don't know how he heard about it. It could be that the man's expulsion was a public spectacle, and that news of it had circulated the public square until it made it to Jesus. It could be the case that Jesus, who has displayed omniscience, which means all-knowingness, throughout the Gospel of John, simply knew that it had happened when it happened. We don't know. We also don't know where Jesus has been. And this may be the bigger question. He instructs the man in John 9, verse 7, to go and wash in the pool of Siloam, and then disappears from the narrative until now. It's the most sustained absence of Christ in the Gospel of John, and you'd be well within your rights to wonder, where's he been? What was he doing while this man that he healed was enduring such trials because of that? But we aren't given an answer. What matters to John is that Jesus is here now, and he's heard somehow what's happened to the man. Jesus' response to the event appears to matter more than his apparent absence during. And there's something to be said for that, isn't there? You take notice of who shows up for you at your lowest, don't you? Who a friend is in your sorrow, in your pain, is in a real way who they are. Plenty can be your friend, even a pretty good friend, in your joy. They can laugh with you. They can celebrate with you. They can come to all the parties and showers. But you know they are fair weather friends. You see how they disappear when your heart is heavy. They think you don't notice, but you do. That's why the friendships we cherish, the family members that our lives would be, and for some of us are, impoverished without, are the ones who are present when we're hurting, who laugh when we laugh, yes, but also cry because we cry, whose heart breaks because of our heartbreak, and who refuse to leave us to grieve and to hurt alone. And so how does Jesus respond to what he's heard has happened? Others around this man are cutting ties. They're trying to keep a safe distance so as not to be guilty by association. Can you imagine the dejection he must have felt? What inexpressible loneliness he must have been experiencing as every relationship and institution he thought held him dear as he held them dear were dropping like flies. And while some saw that loneliness as a reason to abandon him further, Jesus is drawn to him. His heart goes out to him. Jesus is not indifferent to this man's affliction, but is moved to pity. Pity born out of love. And so in that affection, Jesus' immediate response is to search for this man. Like a good shepherd, he will not let even one of his sheep wander the world scared and confused. And we'll never know how long the search lasted, because the detail most important to John is that he found him. And having found him, he asks, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" And this is a somewhat confusing question. It's not clear why Jesus chooses the title Son of Man, a description he often uses of himself in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but almost never uses of himself in John. And it's also unclear why the man replies as he does. "And who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" And if you're reading carefully, you would ask, who is who? Believe in who? Scholars seem to agree with the insight offered by J. Ramsey Michaels, a New Testament commentator, that to this man, the name Son of Man, quote, can only refer to the man who healed him, end quote. But from there, the opinions differ. Some say that the healed man knows that the Son of Man is Jesus, but he doesn't know that this is Jesus who is speaking to him, which is a fair enough claim. This is the first time the man has ever seen Jesus. He's still blind at the end of their first interaction. Others think that the man recognizes Jesus' voice as the voice of the one who healed him, and that he wants to know whose that voice is. He knows that this is Jesus. Now he wants to know who Jesus is, the identity of this Son of Man that he's made such sacrifices for. And I agree with that latter idea. I think the man recognizes the voice of Jesus. How could he forget it? This is the voice that spoke mercifully of this man, while others looked on him and asked, "Who sinned?" This voice that gave the instructions, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam," was stitched into his mind. Those words changed his life. For him, the words of Peter are not a metaphor when he writes in 1 Peter 2, verse 9 of Christ as the one who called you out of darkness and into his marvelous light. And this man's obedience to this voice that now had a face, had given him life. But it had also cost him. Now he's unsure of what happens next. He's unsure of himself. Who am I now? Apart from my family, apart from old friends, old communities. He doesn't know. Would you? The road ahead is covered in fog, and yet, for however much he may fear the unknown, he knows there's no going back. When you've tasted filet mignon, it makes it difficult to ever enjoy a New York strip again. This man had tasted the goodness of Christ. He had felt his touch, heard his voice. What in his previous life could provide even a fraction of that satisfaction? Indeed, it would only be a disappointment. What are the alms of the populace compared to the wealth of heaven's treasures? What is the acceptance of the synagogue compared to the embrace of the Almighty? A strange warmth has filled his soul, and it will not be cooled. He cannot resist this man, Jesus, or forget what he's done for him, no matter the repercussions. Do you think he wanted to be banned from the synagogue? That he hoped to be ostracized by his family? I doubt it. But acquiescing to their demands and fears would have necessitated lying about Jesus, agreeing that he was a sinner after all and that he could not have been from God. He wouldn't do it. He couldn't do it. Like Balaam looking out over the nation of Israel in Numbers, this man was incapable of speaking ill of Christ. Every time he opened his mouth, all that could come forth was praise. He is a prophet. Never since the world began have we seen anything like him. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. But that incapability had led him to this moment. Alone, abandoned, and faced with this man for whom he has surrendered so much and who has just asked him, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" And the healed man replies with a question of his own, filled with readiness and hesitance, hope and fear. Who is he that I may believe in him? And does he speak for you? Are you familiar with that need? That furious longing that occupies the hearts of all whose world started changing when Jesus arrived. The hopeful hesitance of Peter standing at the boat's edge, looking at his Lord on top of the stormy waters and wondering, will he keep me safe if I take this next step? Your friends are disappearing. Your social groups are changing. They don't like who you're becoming. Your family doesn't get it. You wish that they would, but they don't. The culture around you is evolving into what you don't know, but you don't like it either. But it's all very frightening. You're not sure what comes next, but you know there's no reclaiming what once was. In case the last 3 years haven't made that clear. Not without great cost, anyway. So the only way is to go forward, but to do so you need one thing to propel you, one hope to guide you through life's gaze. And so looking for that thing, you ask, Jesus, who are you? And that is not a question Jesus will ever leave unanswered. The very phenomenon of the incarnation, of the Word becoming flesh, reveals a Christ who delights in making himself known. And known to whom? And the temptation is to pipe off just the world, but that answer is too vague. It is a world and a people covered in darkness, among whom the light shines. It is to a sick world that the healer comes. The people and places to which Jesus so often gravitates are the people and places to whom you would think he would be most absent. And isn't that something, that your longings align with his own? That those circumstances in which you most want him to show you who he is are the ones in which he desires most to do just that. So the request of this scared man, who is he? Jesus gives him something to believe in, saying, "You have seen him, and it is he who is speaking to you." Which is so much more than a statement of the obvious. Consider how touching it must have been for a man once blind from birth to have heard those words, "You have seen him." Jesus is reinforcing that first life-altering miracle, calling to the man's memory that initiative Jesus took in performing a wonder in his life. Who am I? I am the one because of whom you see. And in saying he is speaking to you, Jesus displays his will to encourage. No one was speaking to this man. And when they were speaking with hostility, with cruelty. And yet when Jesus heard of his suffering, he sought him, found him, and now speaks tenderly to him, consoling him with his word. And in all of this, Jesus is identifying with and as God's Son of Man, his anointed King, his agent of salvation, sent into the world in love, so that, as he puts it in verse 39, that those who do not see may see. And at this the man said, "Lord, I believe," and worshipped him, his anxiety assuaged by the person of Christ. Notice that no part of this man's circumstances have changed, though. His family has not come back to claim him. His expulsion has not been reversed. These things cannot be undone. He can't return to the life he once enjoyed. He would not enjoy it anymore. His future remains dim. It remains uncertain. But he's found confidence in this, who Jesus is. He knows that he is healed by, found by, redeemed by, and led by the Son of Man. Psalm 112, verse 7 speaks of Jesus when it says it speaks of the man, when it says he is not afraid of bad news. His heart is firm, trusting in the Lord. His heart is steady. He will not be afraid. He asked Jesus for something to believe in. Jesus gave him someone to worship. And the man's certainty of that someone has given him courage sufficient to endure the unknown. Belonging to Christ will cost you. The New Testament does not consider that a possibility, but presents it as a promise. The world that put Jesus to death will not tolerate those who bear his name. And if the world does tolerate you, if your expression of Christianity is agreeable to the world at every level, then the agreeability of your faith may not be in question, but its authenticity might be. But for the ones living in fidelity to Jesus, whose allegiance is pledged to him and no other, you will find that the same voice that called you out of darkness may call you out of toxic situations and relationships. It will call you out of destructive habits and behaviors. It will call you out of your comfort zone and into environments in which you never could have seen yourself. And just you watch as your obedience to that voice, in your refusal to submit to the opinions of its detractors, causes the resistance to mount. Murmurings will begin. Accusations will be hurled. People you thought friends will reveal themselves as foes. You will find yourself stripped of persons and things you once held dear. But when that happens, Jesus will give you what the world can neither give nor rob you of, himself. He will search for you and find you when you feel lost and abandoned. To your anguished cries, "Who is he?" He will give the answer, "Here I am." When your soul is frail and your heart is worn, the Lord, who is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit, will be present to you. When harsh words cut you, his word will mend your wounds. When you grieve, he will remind you that he's borne those griefs. When you are filled with sorrow, he will remind you, "I've carried those too." And if worst comes to worst, and you find yourself ostracized, whether from family, from friends, from social groups, or political allegiances, what you will discover as that takes place is that no sooner have you been cast out than you are swept into the embrace of the Son of Man, who loves you and promises, "I will in no wise cast you out."